Pleasure to be here. Gregory Nelson, Government Affairs with Coconino County. I would like to invite our Forest Service partners up. We have Nicole Branton, the Forest Supervisor with Kaibab National Forest, as well as Marcus Roybal with Public Services of the Kaibab National Forest. And they're here to give a brief update on the Pinyon Plain Mine as it relates to activities associated with it. So thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate your partnership and
Thank you for having me, I think 2 meetings in a row here to present to you all. And we're passing out just a couple pieces of information, a map, and then a few links to some of the monitoring information that's available online. So thank you for inviting us. We wanted to come just give you an update and be available to answer some questions that you all have, because I know that you're hearing from a lot of people about the increased activity at the Pinyon Plain Mine. So I'm Nicole Branton. I'm the Forest Supervisor for the Kaibab National Forest. I also brought with me Marcos Roybal. He is our brand new Public Services Staff Officer. And what that means is that he oversees the recreation, lands, and minerals programs for the Forest Service. And he was formerly our environmental coordinator for the forest. So he's been with the Kaibab a long time and has some history with this project. So just to kind of kick off and set the frame for this, you're probably familiar with Pinyon Plain Mine. It was formerly called the Canyon Mine. And this is a mine that was analyzed by the Forest Service way back in the 1980s. It is a uranium mine, and although it's existed in the 1980s and the environmental review was completed then and then updated in 2012, it had not historically removed any uranium from the ground. And in the last several weeks, activity has increased there, and there is now material being removed from below ground for the first time in that 40-year history that contains mineralized uranium. So this is a little bit different than a lot of times when we would come present to you, because there isn't a Forest Service decision. This is a decision that was made quite a while back. It's been reviewed, it's gone through litigation, but there's not a decision in front of us that, like we would typically come present to you, that we're completing an environmental analysis under the National Environmental Policy Act. And the Forest Service's role in this is essentially ensuring that the proponent, Energy Fuels Resources, who operates that mine, is in compliance with the environmental impact statement and the plan of operations, which is their plan that is approved by the Forest Service regarding how the mine actually operates. So the 2 things that I shared with you today, just to kind of start off this conversation, because I know these are questions that you all are getting as elected officials. I'll start with the backside. The backside shows some of the environmental monitoring that is available to the public. The Forest Service has one piece of monitoring how the mine operates, but there are several other agencies that do as well. So the U.S. Geological Society, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, and others. So we have links there, and we have those available, or will shortly, on the Kaibab website. We're pulling together a lot of those resources because the questions that we're getting, similar to you, I'm sure, are questions from the public about, how do we understand the impacts of what's going on at the mine. On the other side, you'll see a map. That map shows the 2 routes for hauling ore from the mine to processing facility of Energy Fuels Resources. Those are 2 different routes that are approved in the environmental impact statement. And from our conversations with the company, either of those 2 still are possible. So I know that is a question that you all are probably getting, because one of those routes I know touches every district, I think, of Coconino County. And of course, that's an issue that a lot of folks have a lot of interest in. So that's to sort of set the frame on this conversation. I'm going to ask Marcos to step up and give you just a little bit of history, better than I did. And then we can take turns answering questions, and we'll just toggle through this microphone if that works for you all. All right, great. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Nicole, and good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. So I'm thinking where I'll start is with the thumbnail sketch of the status of the mine as we understand it, and talking to Energy Fuels Resources. And then I'll go into a little bit of the history, and it'll be really quick. Want to spend most of the time today answering any questions that may be out there. So we've been in close communication with Energy Fuels Resources for over a year, talking to them pretty much every 2 weeks to get updates from them on their operations at Pinyon Plain Mine. And they informed us on January 8th of this year that they had brought uranium ore to the surface. This is the first time in the mine's history that has occurred. So that's in keeping with our request that they keep us up to date on any major changes like that. And prior to that, we kind of saw this coming. They're required to file a couple different notices with the Environmental Protection Agency based on some permitting that EPA has provided the mining company. And those basically indicated both in November and then in December that the mining company was planning to encounter the uranium ore within a certain period of time. And then the second notice was indicating that they had actually encountered the uranium ore. And that's based on some air quality permitting that the EPA provides. Obviously, as Nicole mentioned, a part of the operation is the mining company is planning to, once they've removed the ore, haul it off site to their mill facility near Blanding, Utah. They haven't started doing that yet. They haven't given us a specific time frame for when that may happen, but it sounds like they're working toward getting the appropriate contracts in place to initiate hauling sometime soon. So as soon as we have more information on that, we'll be sure to share it. In addition to meeting with the mining company regularly, we're visiting the mine site. One of our main roles as the Forest Service, as essentially the landlord of this mine, is to make sure that their operations are complying with the environmental analysis and the associated approval from the 1980s and the subsequent review that was completed, and make sure they're adhering to their plan of operations that they filed with the Forest Service. So we're visiting the mine site at least every month. It's likely we'll be going up there more frequently than that once operations begin in earnest. Again, that's to make sure that everything appears to be in compliance with our portion of that authorization. We've also been meeting regularly with the tribes. Currently, the pattern has been we've had a bi-monthly meeting, so every 2 months. We have an informational presentation and question and answer session focused on providing the latest updates to the tribes and answering questions that may come up. So we met most recently with a number of the tribes a couple weeks ago, and we're preparing for our next meeting, I believe in early March, but that time frame is fairly flexible. Have the meetings more frequently if we hear that that's desirable. And then there's a number of different types of monitoring that are done, both I kind of mentioned the monitoring that we do, but there's environmental monitoring that's done looking at baseline radiation in the area around the mine, so we can understand if the mining activities have an effect and change the radiation levels in and around the mine. U.S. Geological Survey, who Nicole has mentioned, is doing soil and water monitoring around the mine, as well as looking at radioactivity and concentrations of other constituents of concern, other elements of concern in some of the plants and insects, that sort of thing around the mine. So there's quite a bit of monitoring that's been happening, that's going to continue, and it through the life of the mine, and then once the mine closes through the reclamation and closure phase. A lot of folks I know have questions about this monitoring, so something that we're doing is gathering up all the types of monitoring that's required by the authorization, and also looking at other authorizations that other agencies have provided, and seeing what kind of monitoring is tied to that. So we're trying to consolidate that all in one place, so we have the information readily available for ourselves, and we can send folks to those areas to get that information. So a little bit of a work in progress, but we're updating our website almost every day with new information on this. Let's see. So something that's come up quite a bit is the mine in the context of the recent monument designation from August of last year. And I think there's been a fair amount of surprise in some areas that the mine was even allowed to move forward because one of the first things that the proclamation does is it withdraws the area of the monument from future mineral entry. However, there are a couple exceptions to that, and this mine is one of those because it was a valid existing right that was in place at the time of the monument designation. So the proclamation's clear that this mineral withdrawal is put in place, except in the cases of valid existing rights. So there's Pinyon Plain Mine is one, and then there's another one, I believe, on BLM land on the northwestern portion of the monument. So the determination of the validity of this right was affirmed in 2012. That was a part of the review that the Forest Service did of the environmental analysis from the 1980s. So that mineral validity was confirmed then, and that's carried forward, and that's why this mine is allowed to move forward, even though the proclamation is put in place and has that clear mineral withdrawal. And then as Nicole mentioned, this is a little bit of a different type of project for us. Typically we'll come and talk about projects that are in the planning phase. As Nicole mentioned, that finished in the 1980s. And so, that environmental review, the public involvement that goes along with that happened at that time. And so we're more in the information sharing phase of the process right now. And there have been other reviews and other public engagement opportunities. I know when the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality was evaluating the aquifer protection permit for the mining company, there was a public review and another environmental assessment process tied to that. So there have been other points at which there's been public engagement and sort of an environmental assessment connected to this mine. But right now, as we've mentioned, it's sort of more of a, we get information from the mining company and then we share that as efficiently and widely as possible. I think those were the main things I wanted to hit on. Anything else you would add, Nicole? Otherwise, we'd be happy to take questions.
Do we have any questions at this time? Supervisor Horstman.
Yes, unless you want to, are you done with the presentation or I can wait to, okay, good. I have a few questions and thank you both very much for being here. And we know that as you have rightly noted, these are things that are of concern to our residents and we are hearing. So a couple of things that would be helpful is, I know this is something that was in place from the 1980s, the environmental impact statement, the plan of operation, and the 2 haul sites were approved in accordance to that environmental impact statement. My question is, do they need to present to you a travel plan, a timeline, if you will, of their intent to haul, how many trucks per day they're looking to haul, and in terms of, do they need to provide you notice of which of these 2 hauling routes they're going to utilize, or can they utilize both? And then the question is, do they need to notify, for example, some of these hauling routes go through tribal lands. Do they need to notify the tribal lands they go through? One of them is part of private Babbitt ranches. Do they need to be notified as part of this? And last but not least, there was a monument designation. And how does that monument designation affect the Pinyon Mine operation?
Yeah. Why don't I start with the monument piece and we'll try to get through that list. If we miss any of those, though, remind us. You've got them listed in front of you. Okay. So, right, this has been a big surprise to a lot of people who saw the monument designation last August and thought that was the end of seeing any uranium from outside of that area, right? So the monument specifically says that it's subject to valid existing rights. So this is one of those mines that has valid existing rights. So we don't have additional discretion over it based on the monument, but there is an irony there, right, that I recognize the public is experiencing of having heard about the monument designation and mineral withdrawal that went with it, and then just a few months later, seeing an increase in activity here at this particular mine. So that's I think, response to the monument question, unless there's anything more to that one. Okay. All right, then I'm going to pass it to Marcos to answer the questions that you had about the specifics with hauling. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's sort of an unsatisfying answer, but the requirements that the mining company is held to in terms of notifying us when they're going to start hauling, what their timeline is, are, they're pretty much non-existent. My understanding is they don't have legal requirement to notify us of a particular milestone like that. And so that's why we're meeting with them every couple of weeks, at least, to ask very pointed questions about, what's going on with your plans to bring ore to the surface, what's going on with your plans to haul. So that's our way around that kind of lack of a legal protection, to make sure that those notifications take place. And my understanding is that's a similar case for hauling through lands of other jurisdiction. Once the mining trucks leave the mine and forest lands, it's all on state highways and state or national highways. And so they're like any other truck with an asterisk that's hauling material. That asterisk being there's certain federal requirements for hauling radioactive material on national and state highways. And those requirements are sort of based on the concentration or the radioactivity of that material. So that's something that we're seeking to understand from the mining company is what federal standards will those trucks be held to? So don't have an answer to that now, but that's something that we're working on right as we speak to better understand. And then as far as the portion of the route that goes across Babbitt lands, thanks. Yeah, the mining company does need rights of way from the Babbitts and also the state. I think there's some state land that would be crossed in that area too. And they've let us know that they're working on obtaining those rights of way. But again, that's something between them and those other entities. So we ask them every time we meet if they've made any progress on that. And it sounds like up to this point, discussions have been initiated, but there's no particular timeline within which they would be using that route. I think that was everything, but if there was anything that we didn't hit on, please let us know.
So just for clarification, and just from what I'm hearing you say, it's all in place basically with regards to the tribes or the city of Flagstaff, if it comes down through the city, or other agencies, with the exception of possibly state land, the Babbitt ranches, which they would need to get work out authority to do that. And they don't need to let you know a time deadline for hauling or traveling. And so you're trying to monitor them by, just talking with them in hopes that you'll know what's going on.
Correct. Yeah. And they're very, very helpful in the information that they provide us. So I'm pretty confident that they'll be
Good. That would be very helpful to let us know when you do, and I'm sure you will. And any numbers on numbers of trucks or anything they're looking to haul? I don't know if any information's come to your attention that way.
Yeah, I think that number might actually be in the environmental document, and I want to say it's somewhere within the 10 to 15 trucks a day range, but I can confirm that number.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions from board members? Supervisor Fowler.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of with the trucks, do you know how they're going to be covered, or is there, what kind of trucks will it be? People are concerned that it's just going to be covered with a tarp or something. I guess we're still trying to figure out what the federal standards, the they are, and I guess that depends on that truck, what kind of truck they're gonna get. But I just wondered if you knew that. Yeah, also, if there are, how are, once the mining, well, the mining has started, and what time, do we have a time frame when they're actually gonna be running these trucks? I think you tried to answer that earlier, but I wanted to just ask that again. And then how is it that the agencies, the federal agencies, the other agencies that are involved, what kind of resource do you have to be able to address all of the issues? Maybe there aren't that many issues. Seems like it's a lot of issues that come with this mining. I'll ask those two for now.
Yeah, I can start, and Nicole, feel free to jump in. Yeah, so the environmental document does talk a little bit about the specifications for the truck, and they are covered in a tarp, but there are requirements for basically how the tarp is affixed to the truck. So it's not, just kind of flapping on the top, as you can kind of picture that. The sides of the tarp go down over the sides of the truck. So the intent being that there's no wind passing over the ore, and therefore no dust coming off of it. And then as far as the timing of the trucks, again, I think it's, somewhere between 10 and 15 trucks per day. And the mine currently, and my understanding is this will continue, is only operating during the daytime. So the trucks presumably would be traveling during the daytime, plus whatever travel time, if it leaves the mine at the end of the day, whatever travel time it takes to get to the facility at Blanding.
Does it, is there a requirement if there's an accident and is there like an emergency, response plan put together? Is that required? Since they're on the state route and federal routes? And then if it goes through Babbitt, it's a permitting. If there's an accident, is there a plan that they're required to have for emergency?
Yeah, there are general requirements that are outlined in the environmental document. And this is actually something else that we're working on, is reaching out to ADOT and other entities who may have a role in responding to that sort of incident, to get a better answer to that question. And we've also asked the mining company what protocols they would have, and it sounds like they do have some that they're currently under development. So we've asked them to share that with us as soon as they have those available.
And just to follow up on that, Mr. Chair, so we have our own, meeting with the tribes, and Navajo Nation is the main one that's going to be en route. And we have Coconino County, and we have the towns that have emergency responders. I would think that they would, if they have a plan or developing a plan, I would think they would have them involved in that development.
Mhm.
Do you know if that's happening?
I don't. Nicole, have you heard anything along those lines?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that exact question. It's certainly something that the next time we meet with the company, we could ask that question. Since we don't have a permitting piece of the transportation aspect when it leaves National Forest System lands. I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, we recognize that this can start to feel like a little bit of an alphabet soup, right? With all of the different agencies having different pieces of the permitting and monitoring puzzle. So we're happy to be in a role of helping facilitate any of those conversations we can. We're connecting the different agencies. And in fact, we're, as Marco said, convening the conversation of all of those different government agencies together. And so any way we can facilitate making those connections for either the supervisors or any of the groups that you work with as well, we're happy to do that. But we have had some of those agencies, and the company joined some of the informational meetings where we share information with tribes, for example. And they've been pretty forthcoming with providing their information, and sometimes not having the answer at hand, but responding with information later. So That's, part of our future plans, even though we don't have a lot of decision-making authority or administration piece, we're trying to make information as available to people as we can.
Just one more question. I have a lot of questions, but I think this one, what about the cleanup? Once the operation, it's all closed, then what is the requirement, the cleanup?
Yeah, I can't speak to the exact specifics, but there are a number of requirements that are spelled out in the Forest Service's environmental review and approval documents. And then that's a big part of the aquifer protection permit that Department of Environmental Quality issued. Connected to that, there's something that's called the Clean Closure Plan that talks about all of the, essentially all the things the mining company has to do to close down the site, seal up the shaft, monitor groundwater for some period of time after the operation of the mine. So that's spelled out in pretty significant detail as well in that location. So that's something else that we'll be putting on our website.
So I just have to ask, so you just said sometime after. So I worked on the Tuba City Red Metals tailing back in the late 70s to early 80s, and we're able to bury the uranium tailing. Well, today, at the time, it was like the most secure and it's never gonna seep out. Well, we're at the point where it's starting to happen. So how is that, they keep saying that mining is safe now, and the cleanup is like almost a guarantee that it won't get into the water, won't get into the, into the environment with the plants. In Tuba, we had to, all the sheep were hauled away, livestock were hauled away, ground was shaved off for a mile, and all the housing in the area was completely demolished. People's lives were just, and then today we sit with, a cancer rate and the first cancer clinic in northern Arizona, and because of this uranium issue, and that one was just a tailing, but there's over 500 mines, and I'm just wondering how this is different than the mines that are there, and how the cleanup is different, and how do we know that it's not going to go, we have to monitor for 50 years, and just, so I know you don't have all the answers, but I just have to just say what the concerns are and what I have seen, and how when I was volunteering to work on this, what I've seen firsthand and what we experience today.
I hear that and I appreciate that. So, I can't speak to the comparison between those mines and this one. But, that's something that we can, work on looking at. And I think, this mine, has the environmental review that's tied to its authorization, looked closely at groundwater effects and the likelihood that those radioactivity concerns would spread off the site, and then instituted these reclamation measures to ensure that those materials of concern, that radioactive material, is removed. That said, we don't have all the answers. And so this is where the monitoring is going to be essential to understanding how radioactivity, for example, changes over time as the mine is under operation. And I know that one thing that's required in that aquifer permit is the requirement that groundwater is monitored for, I believe it's 30 years after the closure of the mine. So there are protections like that are put in place. But I absolutely hear your concern, and we take that very seriously too. And so we'll provide as much information as we can as we gather up information about those reclamation and closure requirements. We're more than happy to share those.
Vice Chair Begay.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess, there's
it just seems like, the presentation is going where everything's kind of already a done deal. Really don't have to, just like you said, come before us but it's good to know that you're making that effort. But I think, we do have, uh, because we oversee the whole county as the 5 board members, questions are going to come up. A lot of this route is all through Navajo and Hopi, and we have Paiutes that live in all these areas going all the way up to Ute Mountain. So you're talking about the tribes. We've been meeting with tribes. I'd like to know what tribes you guys have been meeting with, because as we go out in these districts, they're saying that nobody has come forth to tell us anything or even, let us know what's going on. And they ask us and we're like clueless. And, it just doesn't seem that, because a lot of times, the answers that you don't have, I think the miners, people that are actually in the position to, as far as the mining company would be able to, let us know so that these questions we can go back and answer, to the people. And so, I just wanted to know, what tribes that you met with. And I mean, that's just to say, I just want to go back and say, okay, these are the tribes they met with and where, just some information. That's what we're being asked for. So, and it is true that, in Tuba City, the uranium, the mining there, it seems like everybody profited from that. And then we're the ones that are struggling with it. Nobody came back and said, here's some monies for cancer. Here's some money for all the stuff that you lost. Your homes, they had to pull a lot of trailers away from rare metals and vacate everybody and told them to leave. Sheep were affected for miles. People were told to get rid of their livestock, and that's their main livelihood. We have sheep, cattle, horses, donkeys, and all sorts of animals out there. And yet, we lost all of that. Nobody's coming back to really say, this is how we'll help you. And now it seems like, to me personally, it just seems like we're kind of going through that same route again. And right now, for rare metals is just there, and people are I don't know. I think they're afraid of what's going to happen again with this uranium mining that's going to happen again. The spill, people who's going to do the cleanup. If a vehicle is, down or whatever, and it spills, who's going to do that? We're not even trained to deal with those things. And how long is it going to take? Anything that happens on the reservation takes years. And by that time, that's when it's going to affect all these families. We have a lot of people that live along these 2 routes that you're talking about. And they're the ones that are going to be affected. And so I'm just kind of sitting here thinking, wow, this is another thing we just talked about in our board meeting earlier, a proclamation that we passed, and it brings me back to that, because we went through Bennett Freeze, we went through all sorts of land issues, within our tribe, and we're really passionate about things that are, simple things like this, and we're leery about what it's going to bring. And so, and that's the reason why, I'm thinking maybe somewhere along the way, we could have the company come, the mining company come, and our answers will be answered, our questions will be answered, I'm sorry. So I'm thinking in that way right now. So I just, it's something, and the routes too. If we go through, there's one route that's going to go through 2 districts. Another route's going to go through 5 districts. Why can't, the company say just the one that's going to affect the 2 districts, if it's going to really go, instead of exposing everybody else within the 5 districts? So instead of, I mean, it's like, let's go to smaller routes so we don't have to expose a lot of other people. I think that's, that's more appropriate than, because it's going to affect them. It's going to affect them no matter what. Even if it's just in the air, it's going to affect. We have a lot of cancer. I lost my dad to cancer. So
Anyway, that's my spiel.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Supervisor Horstman.
Well, I don't want to
These
see.
are both the plans, so she looks at me like, no.
What are you talking? No, you're right. In terms of, certainly the southern route exposes many more people. Districts aside, it does expose many more people. One of the questions that I have a couple more questions. One is does the EPA do any kind of air monitoring along the haul route?
So my understanding is EPA doesn't specifically.
ADEQ.
ADEQ is responsible for the air quality permitting.
Uh-huh.
And on my to-do list is actually to look at the monitoring requirements tied to that. But one thing that the company has indicated is they're not required to do radiation monitoring along the haul route, but it's something that they typically do. I just learned this today. So I asked them for their radiation monitoring plan along the haul route when they have that available. So that's
That'd be
something that
good.
it sounds like will be happening. And then as far as the actual air quality permit goes, that's something that we're looking into.
Good. And then do you know the anticipated life of the Pinyon mine?
Yeah, I've seen anywhere from 2 to 10 years, but I think what I've been seeing most recently is like 28 months is the anticipated timeline for it. I guess the way the ore body is, it's a fairly discrete unit, and it's relatively small. So once they've mined that out, as I understand it, it's kind of a done deal, and it's a relatively small deposit.
So it really looks like we need to look at the EIS to really see it's quite old, but that's really going to be the terms which they're going to be held by, it sounds like.
In terms of the Forest Service authorization.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hess.
I only have basically one question. Their grandfather clause or the valid existing rights clause, is there an expiration date on that? That you know of?
Not that I know of.
So it could be forever, it could be, we don't know.
I think as long as the monument's in place under the current proclamation.
But the one that the Pinyon mine, they had the ground,
Oh,
so,
in terms of their valid existing right?
yes,
Yeah, as far as I know, that's kind of for the life of the mine.
really, okay. And then we know we talked the alphabet soup as far as who gets to know but do we know who is tracking them? You guys aren't the ones on the roads, but is it ADOT? Who is it?
Again, this is something that we're learning ourselves. I think it'll be based on, again, those federal requirements tied to radioactive material transport. And I think, again, based on the radioactivity of the material. So it could be, my understanding is if it's a very, very low concentration of radiation, which, you could achieve by putting a little bit of radioactive stuff in a truck full of dirt, right? So if it's something like that, it could be just like any other truck driving down the road. But if it's something that's a much higher concentration, I think there are other requirements that it'll be held to.
Okay, this is a tough question and it's a interesting dilemma that we look and like we talked about. We're just kind of finding out what is going to be done, not if. So those are the two questions I had. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Horstman.
And by the way, thank you for giving us what you've got and the information you have. It's helpful for us. And two things for one for you, one for my colleagues, is in terms of the potential authorized haul routes, just take a look at that map. If you take a look at 64 going into 180 then goes down into Flagstaff halfway or about a fourth of the way, of course, which is the blue line that continues is not 180, but it makes it look like it is. I think that's Cedar. Is that correct? And that's a Forest Service road?
Most of the blue line would be the section on Babbitt and State Line.
And that's a Forest Service road, as I understand it.
It's a portion of it is a Forest Service road, and then once it crosses off the forest, it no longer is.
Oh, good. So, okay, so that's why the authorization across Babbitt's.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to exactly why that route was chosen, other than it was more direct than the southern route that's on the map, and it would cross less national forest land.
Thanks. And then just my colleagues, I have reached out to Energy Resources for a tour for the Board of Supervisors. And they did say that they would in fact organize a tour for the board and some staff, and have not heard back, but I will keep following up. And hopefully we can use that as an opportunity to really hear from them directly.
Yeah, thank you. I had two questions, but they have in part been answered already. One was, how long the anticipated life expectancy of this mine. Just so I'm clear, you said 2 to 10 years, but more like, I heard 8 to 10 months is more expected?
I think 28 months is
28
what I've been hearing. So more on the 2-year side is what we've been hearing most recently.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question I have, which is, are there any kind of regulations or any towards transportation of uranium tailings through populated areas, in particular the southern route coming through Williams, Flagstaff, and then all along the reservation? Are there any kind of regulations, or is there any kind of do we have any authority over any kind of transportation ordinance to be able to at least require certain requirements to transport or through our county?
I'm not sure about the second part of that question, what authority you would have. But again, I think in terms of the general requirements, they're tied to those federal standards for transport of radioactive material that are based on the radioactivity of it, basically, essentially how intense that radioactivity is. And that's something that we can post that document to our website. So I know a lot of folks have similar questions.
Okay, thank you. Our county deputy county attorney, can you answer if we do have any kind of authority over transportation ordinances? Yeah, safety ordinance through our county?
I can't tell you that off the top of my head, but it's certainly something we can look into.
Please do. Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions or comments from board members? This is something that we are concerned about, in particular, the transport of the ore. I'm sure we would prefer not to have mining happening, uranium mining happening in our county, but if it has to happen, we want to make sure it's as safe as possible. So we want to make sure that we've looked at every avenue to ensure that we're making sure that it's safe through our populated areas. Supervisor Fowler?
Yes, thank you. I would request that, you're having these meetings with the companies and others. If there's any heads up that you could provide to us, because we represent the communities that are going to be impacted by this, or, just the route that's going to be going through. The more information we have, the better information, because there's quite a bit of misinformation that is out there. So if you could share those information with the full board, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from board members? Supervisor Horstman?
Just, again, thank you for, your diligence on this, following up, checking around with the mine, and working in collaboration with the various tribes and with, of course, Coconino County. So we really appreciate that. I know our residents appreciate that. And, onward. It's, this is something we were hoping we would not have to address because of the monument, but as you say, it's grandfathered in. So the next best thing, as our chair said, is we want to make sure that we're diligent in everything we can do to ensure the safety of our residents in Coconino County. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I have a question on that. Is it common practice to, if something's approved 40 years ago, to not revisit the environmental impact statement? Because you would think that after 40 years, things might change.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we did actually revisit it in 2012 and did a comprehensive review of all the environmental analysis, the water analysis, the wildlife analysis, and so on, and determined that there wasn't a need for supplemental analysis based on, taking existing knowledge at that time and comparing it to the knowledge that was used in the 1980s. Now, we're always, kind of on the lookout for new scientific literature, new studies that might indicate there's some difference in environmental components that might be affected by the mine. So if if something like that were to come to our attention, then we would initiate a similar review. So it is something that we're always, we recognize it's old. It's an old document. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but it is a concern that even the most recent environmental impact study wasn't done since 2012 and we're 2024. So that means even that's 10 to 12 years old. To me, it's a concern that it wasn't revisited sooner before they were allowed to go online. So, but I understand you don't have any control over that, but I just need to make that statement. So thank you.
Appreciate that.